Welcome to the Rural Development, Ag, and Natural Resources Committee. I'm Sharon Shewmake, State Representative from the 42nd District, which is up here in Whatcom County, and I'm the Vice Chair of this committee. I'm going to have a conversation today with the Chair of this committee, and I'll turn it over to State Representative Mike Chapman.
I'm a state representative from the 24th Legislative District, which is the North Olympic Peninsula, Jefferson, Clallam, and a good portion of Grays Harbor. And Representative Shewmake and I have been chair and vice chair for the last year, and we're heading into our second session. This upcoming session will be similar in some respects to last year's virtual remote session. What we learned last year was in committees, when we conducted those over Zoom, we were able to have a lot of testimony from individuals from around the state testify on bills instead of always having to drive to Olympia. So for those of us, Representative Shewmake and I, who represent more rural districts further away from Olympia, you'll still be able to connect via Zoom for our committee hearings. Every committee hearing will be conducted via Zoom, and we'll still be taking remote testimony. And so I think that's a real positive change for just good government. With technology, how our world really has changed. Senator Vandeweghe, who chairs a comparable committee in the Senate, and I were hosting a Zoom call on Steelhead, and we had a guide who wanted to make some comments. And so when I called on him to make some comments, he's on his drift boat fishing, and he had his cell phone. And it was a real showstopper to a degree, but it also just showed that here's a person in the industry, a guide, on the river, and specifically he was in a spot in the river to kind of show us a little bit of what he was going to talk about and what the issues, some of the concerns he had. I'll never forget that. It meant a lot. I represent somebody who called in from the river, and it's different than maybe just a normal hearing in Olympia. So it's a committee with three titles in essence. Usually you hear like the Education Committee or the Appropriations Committee, and it's really clear what their mission is. Well, we're the Rural Development, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Committee. And one of the things that I did a few years ago is I asked to add the rural development to the title of our committee, because I feel like in a lot of things that we do in Olympia, I wanted to make sure that the rural development, and especially around the rural economy and the rural economy as it exists today, along with a future economy as we continue to see new innovations, would be front and center in the legislature's mind. And I thought by adding the term rural development to the title, we would make sure that every legislator understands that rural development, rural economic development, the rural lifestyle that so many of us enjoy is front and center and being considered by all aspects that the legislature takes on.
One of the fun things about this committee is the breadth of things that we get to cover, right? So we'll talk about rural development. We'll talk about sometimes a financing program. That I remember one of the first bills that I heard was a program that allowed fishers to use some of their assets to finance improvements to their boat, et cetera. And I thought that was really exciting because my background is an economist and I love making sure more people have access to capital. But we talk a lot about agriculture, but we also will talk about forestry practices. And we spend a lot of time talking about forest fires and how to manage our forests better. We'll also talk about wild huckleberries. We had a bill on wild huckleberry gathering a few years ago, and it was so interesting to learn more about that. We'll talk about meat processing, about cheese, all sorts of delicious things. Speaking of delicious things, we'll even get into salmon, water resources, and I think that's one of the really fun parts. My district up here in Whatcom County, we have all of these things. We have forests, we have berries, we have dairies, we have salmon, and all of these things, and rural county communities, and all of these things impact each other. And so while it may seem broad and disconnected, it's actually really important to make sure that when you're thinking about berries, you're thinking about dairies, you're also thinking about the folks that are downstream, right? Or when you're thinking about rural places, you're also thinking about the people that work and make a living in those rural places.
And these are men and women who work hard every day in a field, farming, fishing, natural resource harvest of trees. I mean, these are men and women working hard at careers that they love, and I think both of us have a real respect and want to support them. I think Representative Shewmake and I represent two of the most diverse districts in the state of Washington. And, Washington's known, we're known for coffee, right? Starbucks, we're known for Costco, we're known for Microsoft. But one of the things that I learned this summer, and I was working on a drought committee, and the impacts of the drought this summer is that Representative Shewmake's district, Whatcom County specifically, really grows about 95 to 98% of the good raspberries, not the tasteless ones, but the good, hardy, fresh raspberries, and they were impacted by drought this year. And so we looked at some ways to help the farmers as their crops especially during the June heat wave.
We saw this heat wave and the drought, and it really impacted. How are we going to make sure that we're continuing to innovate and continuing to pivot with agriculture? That's one of the things that farmers are amazing at. Is they may not have an engineering degree, but they always know a little bit of engineering, and they're always willing to come up with a cool new way to get around an obstacle. And they have to think not just about the engineering, but the crop science, the weather, the biology, the economics. I think that's so interesting and such a fascinating topic. We were talking earlier about the machines that harvest the raspberries, and they're incredible. They go over the rows, and they have these little fingers, and they agitate all the berries, and then they drop out and fall out. I make my students, when I teach economics, we talk about those machines, and we talk about labor and capital trade-offs, right? How can we make people more efficient? By bringing in new technology? And our farmers have always been on the forefront of that.
We're a citizen legislature. I mean, we have a PhD in economics with Representative Shewmake. I mean, we have a citizen legislature with some really highly educated, highly, really smart individual. And I learned so much from my colleagues. We always will say that I'm so grateful to serve. Truly, we're grateful to serve. But I have to be honest, I am grateful for the knowledge that I learned. And I've learned so much from Representative Shewmake in her time. And honestly, I'm the chair and she's the vice chair, but I think, we've tried to run the committee as a team, and I view her as really a co-chair. The other thing about the Ag and Natural Resource and Rural Development Committee, traditionally it has always kind of passed more bipartisan bills than probably most other committees, and we pass a lot of bipartisan bills out of committee with unanimous votes, and we pass a lot of bills off the House floor and send them to the Senate with unanimous votes because of the nature of the issues that we deal with. Raspberry and crabs are not partisan. I mean, we found that both Republicans and Democrats love good raspberries and love good crab. And I think both of us have brought the same, we work with our ranking members, and a committee is only as good as the cooperation between the chair and vice chair and the ranking and the assistant ranking. And I've seen Representative Shewmake, reach across the aisle, work with the ranking member, work with the assistant ranking member, and really help craft these bills that then become, maybe they would be a little more split. And the next thing you know, it's going to be a unanimous vote out of committee. I think that's one of the things that we all try to bring is a little bit of collegiality to this committee. And we have it's 8-7, we have 8 Democrats and 7 Republicans. And as we know, you need to work, you need to have friends. And I appreciate, I don't know how you feel, Rep Shewmake, but I just appreciate our ranking and vice ranking and the members on the other side of the aisle.
And I got to say, one of the things that you were talking about is how much we learn from each other, and then how much we learn just generally in this job. I think the best part of my job is that I get to learn about everyone else's job all over the state. It's super interesting. It's humbling to hear about people's stories and what they're up against and how they figured out how to make the best out of a situation or how to make the best out of a really good situation. But that's also why it's so important to reach out to us. When we have a bill on huckleberry farming and you're someone who uses huckleberries, we need to hear from you. We need to better understand the constraints that you're working with, what your goals are, how your industry works, and how it looks like from your perspective.
This next session will be the short session, the 60-day session, which means the committee will be limited in the number of bills we can hear and consider and potentially pass out of committee, and things move really. The cutoff dates move fast, and we just are limited. And it's designed. It's a short session. The budgetary process is more of an update than a new budget. For the committee, one of the priorities will be, so last year we passed the priority legislation for the Department of Natural Resource around wildfire and wildfire prevention. And we're going to be getting updates and making sure that legislation is doing what it needs to do, knowing that wildfire is such a huge carbon emitter in our state. And when forests burn, we lose jobs, we lose product for market. By 2040, what we'd want to do is set up a framework where we can have 1 million acres of Washington forests restored. 1 million acres that needs to be fully restored through disease or fire. We want to work to conserve 1 million acres of working forests that are at pressure for being converted to housing or other or possible commercial activity. We want to keep our working forests working, and then 1 million acres of reforestation by 2040, so that the next generation of Washingtonians can enjoy and appreciate the vast acreage of forests that we have in Washington State. My district's known for Dungeness crab and the crab fishery, and I represent out to the North Coast and down to ocean shores on the Washington coast, and the crab fishery is a huge part of our economy out here. We're working on a bill. We passed it out of the House last year. It's a bill around crab evisceration, and there are times where ocean currents and ocean conditions lead to a domatic acid getting into the middle part of the crab, the center of the crab, or what they call the butter of the crab. And often the crab fishery will be catching crabs. The numbers of crabs will be good, and they'll bring them into market, and they'll find, oh no, they have this domatic acid, and they right now have no ability they have to destroy tons of crab, and that nobody likes to see that. Nobody likes to see the loss of a food source. Nobody likes to see that many crabs be destroyed for no reason. So we're working on a bill where we could cut out the middle of the crab and still send the crab legs, which don't hold the domatic acid, still send them to market safely. And at least then our crab fishery would not be decimated. Last year, they really took a hit.
And I don't think I've ever told you this, Rep. Chapman, but a long time ago, I was doing some work in Hong Kong, and I went through a seafood market, and there were Dungeness crabs and gooey ducks from Washington State, USA. And so it's really one of those amazing exports where we touch the whole world. And these crabs are important for our rural economy. They're important for Washington State's economy. And so I'm so glad that we have folks at the Department of Health, because of your work on this, in this committee especially, making sure that people can still enjoy delicious, I think Dungeness crabs are the most delicious crabs, safely. I've been working on a bill that would be a complement to the Sustainable Farm and Fields program, which we passed a few years ago. And that was a fund that we created that would allow farmers to tap in to do soil sequestration work or anything that really reduces their carbon emissions. One thing that I've been learning is there's so much opportunity for farmers to be part of this climate solution. A lot of them want to be part of this climate solution, but it's just totally new markets. So I heard from a solar installer that the USDA loans on solar in rural areas are so good that the hardest part was convincing the farmer that the deal was really the deal, that it was really as good as it looked. And so I thought, well, maybe if we could get some advisors there, people who aren't making money off of the sale of the solar panels, to walk farmers through some of these purchases and be a trusted source of advice on how to structure a contract for renewable energy, for carbon sequestration, if they want to get into a carbon market, for looking at energy efficiency improvements. And a lot of our dairies are looking at kind of the next generation of dairy digesters. Could you get someone on the ground to help you walk through those contracts and walk through some of those decisions that's really experienced in this? So we thought that we'd put them at the conservation districts. Right now, the conservation districts have all sorts of great people who are working on water quality, on soil quality. And so green energy and sustainability just seems like the next step for these incredible organizations. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you'll want to reach out to our offices. I really hope you do. You can also watch us on TVW, or you can jump onto the Zoom committee meetings.
I also would like to thank everyone. Feel free to contact either myself or Representative Shewmake if you have any questions or concerns. And for all the men and women that work hard in our districts every day, we're here working hard for you. So thank you.